lesson will teach you how to write the equation for a parabola, in standard form. And remember, we have two possibilities for standard form, depending on whether x was squared or y was squared. If it's an x squared, our standard form is x minus h squared equals 4p times y minus k. And if we have our y squared, then it would be y minus k. Notice the k stays with the y. Squared equals 4p times x minus h. So what we're looking for is for whatever squared needs to be on the left-hand side, and we need to complete the square to make it look as x plus or x minus y plus y minus something squared. There are a set of steps you go through each time that you write an equation for a parabola in standard form. The first thing you want to do is whatever term is squared, you want to isolate that on the left-hand side, move everything else to the other side. So in this case, our x was squared, so we want to leave our x squared and our negative 2x on the left-hand side. I'm going to leave a space before I put my equal sign so that I have room to complete the square. And I'm going to move everything else to the other side, so I'm going to add 4y to both sides and subtract 9. Okay, so this is what we have now. Whoops, I wanted to put plus 9, minus 9. Okay, now we need to complete the square for the x's. Now remember, we did this with our circles. To complete the square, you take the coefficient of x here, divide it by 2, and square it. So just go over to the side somewhere. We have negative 2 divided by 2, or a lot of people just do this in their heads, is negative 1, and you square that and you get positive 1. Now one common error is that everyone remembers to do plus 1 here to complete the square. Do not forget to add 1 to the opposite side also to keep your equation balanced. Okay, so step 1 was to move anything that wasn't the squared term to the other side. Then we complete the square for the x's in this case because they were squared. Now we are going to factor that down. X squared minus 2x plus 1 is x. You can look at this a couple of ways. Usually actually all the time, if you take this middle term and just divide it by 2, that's what would go here. And notice that is the case. Factors of 1 that add to equal negative 2 are negative 1 and negative 1. So it would be x minus 1 squared. Equals, let's simplify this side. Negative 9 plus 1 gives me a negative 8. Now we're almost to standard form. We have x minus something squared equals, and notice we're supposed to have some type of parenthesis here. The y is not supposed to have a coefficient. So what you do is you take whatever the coefficient or the number in front of y is and just factor that out of the right-hand side. Okay, so we have x minus 1 squared equals 4 times. If I factor out a 4, I have y minus, and 8 divided by 4 would give me a 2 here. This is the standard form. So you follow the same steps every time. Whatever is squared, move it to one side, move everything else to the other. Then you complete the square for the term that was squared. And then on the right-hand side, you want to factor out whatever is in front of that variable so that it looks like it should in standard form. And it'll become more clear, hopefully, as we do a few more examples. I have 2 more examples here. And I'm actually going to do this one first. Okay. So we have x squared minus 6x minus 34y plus 77 equals 0. We want that in standard form. We follow the steps. Whatever is squared, in this case the x's, are going to stay on the left-hand side. Everything else I'm going to move to the right-hand side. And always leave a space right there before you put your equal sign. It just makes it easier to complete the square. So I move the negative 34y to the other side. I'd have to add that. So I get positive 34y. And I'd have to subtract the 77 from both sides. So there we go. Now we're going to complete the square for the x's. So we take the number in front of x, negative 6, divide it by 2, and square it. That's what you do every time you complete the square. We get 9. So we add 9 to both sides. On the left, that creates a perfect square. On the right, because we have to keep our equation balanced. Okay? Now let's factor down this left-hand side. This would be x minus, remember, if you just take this middle term, whatever divided by 2 would be 3. squared. You can always check by factoring it out. Okay? So we have x minus 3 squared equals 34y, and then we want to take negative 77 and we want to add 9 to it. That gives us negative 68. And our last step here is to go ahead and factor out whatever was in front of this y. So we factor 34 out of this right-hand side. 34 goes into 68 twice. So we end up with x minus 3 squared is equal to 34 times y minus 2. Okay? We'll do one more example so we can go through those steps again. All right, last example. So again, steps for putting in standard form for a parabola are to take whatever is squared and leave it on the right-hand side. In this case, the y was squared, so we're going to put all the y's, on the left-hand side, and move everything else to the other side. So I would have on this side a positive x and a plus 19 if I use the rules of algebra to move those. Okay? Notice we're not done here, and the reason for that is because we have a negative 4 times the y squared. So we don't want a coefficient in front of the y. So what we're going to do is divide everything by negative 4. Okay. Now we have y squared plus 4y. Negative 16 divided by negative 4 is a positive 4. Over here, I'm going to write this as negative 1/4 x minus 19/4. Okay, so we've divided. Now we have the y so that we can complete the square. We take that number in front of y, which is 4 in this case, divide it by 2, and square it, which gives us 4 again. We add that to both sides. Okay. And then we factor down the left-hand side. It should now be a perfect square, and it is. We get y plus 2 squared equals negative 1/4 x. We want to go ahead and add negative 19/4 and 4. If you want, you can get a common denominator or use your calculator, whichever you're most comfortable with. Either way, you get negative 3/4 here when you add those. Our last step is, remember, we do not want this coefficient in front of x, so we're going to factor out a negative 1/4 from everything on that right-hand side. So we'll have y plus 2 squared equals negative 1/4 times x plus 3, so that if we distributed that back through, we would get negative 1/4 x minus 3/4. So there you have it. That would be the standard form for this equation. You do the same steps every time you have a problem like this. Whatever's squared, leave it on the left-hand side. Move everything that doesn't have that variable to the right. Complete the square, remembering to add it to both sides, whatever you use to complete the square. Factor that down as its perfect square,